This is special live coverage from the CBN News Channel.
Tonight,
President Biden heads to Capitol Hill, touting the accomplishments of the first 100 days of his administration.
from the race to get Americans vaccinated and the coronavirus pandemic under control,
Put it simply, if you've been waiting for your turn, wait no longer.
To the waging war with Congress on the future of infrastructure across the country.
I think everyone acknowledges we need significant increase in infrastructure. It's going to get down to what we call infrastructure.
tonight's speech comes as the blue skies of the Biden administration are clouded by what some call a crisis at the border.
The United States plans to increase relief to the region, strengthen our cooperation to manage migration in an effective, secure, and humane manner.
And across the aisle, claims of a false sense of unity.
President Biden, I don't think, believes in bipartisanship.
Tonight, for the first time as the 46th president, Joe Biden addresses a joint session of Congress. His speech, the Republican response, and analysis from our CBN News team.
Members of Congress and the nation set to hear from President Biden in his first joint session address as leader of the United States. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this special live CBN News coverage. I'm Jenna Browder.
Good evening. I'm John Jessup. The speech, which comes in about 15 minutes, comes on the eve of the president's 100th day in office. In that time, Biden's administration has worked to live up to his campaign promises, undoing many of Trump-era policies.
Looking at the numbers, over the course of the last 100 days, President Biden has reversed 62 of his predecessors' policies, like rejoining the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization. The number of reversals is a big increase from President Trump, who in his first few months only reversed 12 of President Obama's orders.
Also, since taking office, President Biden has signed 11 bills into law, including the nearly $2 trillion COVID relief package passed with only Democratic support. He's also issued 42 executive orders outpacing any president, dating all the way back to Harry Truman.
Of course, one of the biggest challenges facing the Biden administration these last few months, the coronavirus crisis and vaccination efforts in America. President Biden promised 100 million shots in arms by his 100th day in office, a goal that was not only reached but doubled. To date, more than 232 million vaccinations have been administered in America, some 200 million of those coming since Biden took office.
And on the immigration front, the president hit the ground running. On the same day as his inauguration, Mr. Biden signed executive actions to stop construction of the border wall and end a Trump-era ban on citizens traveling from Muslim-majority countries, delivering on promises made during the election cycle.
Immigration has also posed problems for this administration. A surge of the migrants at the southern border has created what's widely recognized as a humanitarian crisis. It's an issue President Biden is expected to address in his speech tonight, which is set to begin just moments from now at around 9 p.m.
That is right. You see there on the House floor, we're about to see images soon of the House floor where they gavelled in just about 15-20 minutes ago. Tonight, we bring you special team coverage of that speech. If you want to join the conversation, you can comment in real time and see what others are saying by watching along with our YouTube audience on the YouTube channel, and you can participate in that live chat.
Our team tonight, Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson, chief political analyst David Brody, and we begin with White House correspondent Eric Phillips. Eric, we know that COVID and immigration are going to be included tonight. What else will President Biden focus on?
Well, Jenna and John, you will hear the president tonight say the words, "America is on the move again." As a matter of fact, you should hear those words within the first couple of moments of his speech. He really is meaning this speech to be an upbeat report of his first 100 days in office, because not only is it the first 100 days, but as has been pointed out, this is also his first speech addressing the joint session of Congress. What you'll also hear him talking about is the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. That was a huge victory for this administration. Remember, that was signed into law within his first 2 months in office, and that sent $1,400 payments into the pockets of many Americans. So he certainly will rehearse that victory. You will hear him talking about those 200 million plus shots that have gone into the arms of Americans. Again, far exceeding the 100 million goal he set for the first 100 days, something he has certainly touted. He will be talking about the American Jobs Plan, which is the first part of his huge infrastructure plan that the White House has been pushing out. That plan, $2+ trillion in expense, meant to create jobs and meant to shore up the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure of the nation. The president rolling that out just a few weeks ago. But probably one of the biggest things that people will really be listening for tonight is the second half of that infrastructure plan, dubbed the American Families Plan, or what the White House has called the Social Infrastructure Plan. This is one that doesn't deal with physical infrastructure, but does deal with things that people, some would say the average American deals with every day. In this plan, there is universal child care. In other words, universal preschool for those 3 and 4 years old for everyone that will be paid for. There is also free college tuition for community college for 2 years for every American, regardless of income. And that includes dreamers, those children who were brought to the U.S. Illegally as children who have been here ever since. They also will be eligible for that. There's an extension of paid family leave for families that have to take care of loved ones so that they'll continue to have income. So those are the types of things that we're going to hear the president talk about tonight in the American Families Plan. But here's the thing. He won't get away without talking about some of the challenges this administration has faced. You mentioned the border crisis that we're seeing right now, where there are migrants who are overwhelming facilities there, especially unaccompanied children. That's something that this administration is dealing with right now. You know, the vice president has been appointed to try to head that up. That's something we also are expecting to hear the president talk about tonight, as well as the spate of mass shootings that have been occurring in this country, not just over the last year, John and Jenna, but we could look at just the last couple of months, really the last couple of weeks, and talk about this problem of gun violence and mass shootings and what the White House is going to do about it. They are facing challenges on many fronts.
All right, Eric, we're hearing that he wants to tout the accomplishments, but this is also a little bit of a pivot point so he can talk about his legislative agenda ahead. Real quickly, David, I want to get to you, but before I do, I just kind of want to give our viewers a sense of what's playing out in that middle box on the top of the screen. There you see the House floor where the president will speak in just a little under 10 minutes. You see Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and right next to her, a historic moment that we'll see later tonight, Vice President Kamala Harris standing next to Madam Speaker, right behind the President. David, I want to get your thoughts here. What are you looking to hear tonight from President Biden?
Well, it'd be nice to actually not just hear the words, but see the actions. I'll be honest with you, John. I'm really not too concerned about what he's going to say as much as I am curious about what he's going to do after the speech. I mean, this is not a State of the Union, but our State of the Union is badly divided. I mean, just take your own pulse rate and your heart rate. Many folks would say, well, I tell you what, I'm okay with boring. Because Joe Biden's been kind of boring compared to Trump. Anybody's boring compared to Trump. And you might think that's a good thing. But here's part of the problem. You have boring for sure. You have no chaos. You have no drama. And you might just take a sigh of relief with that. The problem is that along with the boring comes a major liberal smorgasbord of ideas and actual actions. And that's exactly what this Biden administration has done. So the words will be flowery tonight. They always are. With every administration. But once again, what about the actions? Look, I got to tell you, I think we're in for a real rough ride on unity. I mean, I don't think any of us can look each other straight in the face and be serious about the fact that we feel together as a country. We're not. We're very, very divided. And Joe Biden is a big reason for that because of why? Budget reconciliation. He took that COVID stimulus bill, did it without any Republican votes, and went ahead and passed it. I can go down the list. He's going to do the same thing most likely with infrastructure. He has introduced critical race theory into the education system into America. He has talked about America being systemically racist. So look, I mean, he has ramped up the oxygen in terms of division in this country, even though his words say something different, but his actual actions are what matter here. I think it's been extremely disheartening to see someone who campaigned on unity, someone that got the presidency because of that single pledge. That was it. unity. I'm going to be the guy to be the healer in chief. He's done the exact opposite.
We should mention we just saw Chief Justice John Roberts walk in as we continue to see lawmakers and others flood into the House floor. Chief Justice Roberts will be the only justice on the floor tonight representing the Supreme Court of the United States. Abigail, to you, we know it's a smaller group of lawmakers there tonight, only about 200. The chamber holds about 1,000. Why is that? And how is it decided which senators and which representatives got a seat?
Well, Jenna, this year will certainly look very different. As you said, normally for a State of the Union or joint address, there's about 1,600 people in attendance. And as you said, this year there will only be 200. And we're hearing there's about 50 House members and 60 senators. And as far as who got an invite, it really varied on your caucus. So it sounds like Senate Democrats did a lottery system, while Republicans had a more first come, first served system for their tickets. And I also heard of Republicans and Democrats in senior positions and leadership positions that actually offered their tickets to freshman members who've never had the chance to go to a presidential address. So,
Abby, I'm so sorry. If I can,
that's okay.
If I can, real quickly, I just want to acknowledge the fact that Jill Biden came in and you see the chamber. Everyone inside was applauding the First Lady coming into the chamber. I'm sorry, Abby, if you want to continue.
Well, I was just saying, some years we see some members sit out the State of the Union or joint address out of protest. This year, if they're not there, it's likely because they did not swing an invite. There were some Republicans who were criticizing Biden for this invite only. But even though many lawmakers have already been vaccinated, having 1,600 people in a room, masked or not, vaccinated or not, obviously presented a lot of risks. And we know that those who are in the room tonight had to either show proof that they've been vaccinated or show a negative COVID test in the past 2 days. So it is very hard to get in that room tonight.
Abby, it was just about 100 days ago, Capitol Hill was the site of a deadly riot. I wonder how much that plays in tonight's atmosphere. What are you hearing?
Oh, yes. Well, security is very heightened on Capitol Hill tonight, although Speaker Nancy Pelosi did make a point of saying that the limited number tonight in the House chamber is not so much because of security threats, but it really is because of the pandemic. But tonight, we're going to see President Joe Biden walk through the center doors of the House floor that just months ago, lawmakers were barricading to protect themselves. And we're also, this is all coming as we're seeing new videos released from that attack in the past couple of days, showing officers being beaten outside the Capitol, sort of bringing up memories that are still very fresh. And for some senators that are there tonight, it'll be the first time that they're back on the House floor since January 6th, when they went before and after the riot to vote to certify the election results. So, there are a lot of memories. They're still fresh, and I think this is something that President Joe Biden is going to address in his speech tonight. And, it's still a big deal for many people who are going to work on the Capitol every day.
Well, we should mention President Biden, his approval rating right now sits around 54%, depending on what poll you're looking at. Tonight, his speech will focus heavily on the American Families Plan, as we've been talking about, a $1.8 trillion spending plan on the heels of the American Rescue Plan and the American Jobs Plan. One big question heading into tonight, David, this question for you, is how to pay for all of this. In notes that we got today from the White House, the plan is to raise taxes on high earners. Will this affect people who are not in the high earning category?
Well, they're saying people that are making over $400,000 a year. They're also saying they're going to raise the corporate interest rate to 28%. Of course, I don't buy the fact that it's going to get up to 28%. Joe Manchin, a Democrat, even says 25%. And then they're looking at capital gains taxes as well, raising it if you make $1 million or more in capital gains. So, that's kind of the way they're, quote, paying for it. But look, Jenna, this is $6 trillion. You talked about $2 million on this American Families Plan. That'll be announced tonight. There's $2 million on the infrastructure bill, and there was already $2 million passed on the COVID stimulus bill. That's $6 trillion, folks, in 100 days. That's intense money.
I'll sit in the middle seat. Stay here for a week.
So look, beyond all of that money, you've got a lot of other things going on. You know, I talked at the top of the broadcast about the liberal agenda. I didn't even mention HR1, right? The attempt to federalize elections. Beyond HR1, there is the commission to study what they're going to do on the Supreme Court, potentially court packing. You can go down the list, the Equality Act, DC statehood. I mean, where does it end? I mean, it has just been one liberal agenda item after another. And let me give you the bottom line. Let me try to sum it all up for you. I've got one name, two words. I guess it's one name, Joe Manchin. That's it. America goes as Joe Manchin goes. It's that simple. Why do I say that? Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, he's the guy that does not want to change the legislative filibuster. Kyrsten Sinema to a degree as well. But let's look at Joe Manchin. If Joe Manchin says, yeah, I'd like to change the legislative filibuster, folks, that's it. That's it. It's over. 50 votes, everything would require 50 votes. And at that point, DC statehood, HR1, it all goes through. Court packing, it all goes through. Manchin is the guy keeping America alive at this point.
Yeah, Manchin and of course the Senate filibuster, a lot certainly hinges on that.
We are just seconds away from the president. He is expected to appear at the door of the chamber of the House. He will do the traditional walk in to a very scaled back, almost deconstructed State of the Union. Normally you see his full cabinet. You normally see members of the military. You normally see Supreme Court justices. Instead, you're seeing just two members of his cabinet rather than the full cabinet. There is no designated survivor tonight because of the fact that most of them will be watching like you at home. They're watching this on their TVs or streaming this. And the general and the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice are there representing their designated branches of the government.
And as we mentioned, there are 80 House representatives, 60 senators, split evenly, Republican and Democrat. And you're looking now at the Vice President and Speaker of the House. John, you had mentioned this is a historic moment. Two women sitting behind the president in this first address that President Biden will give to Congress and to the American people. Yeah,
something we've never seen before. Real quickly, Eric, any sense of how long President Biden's speech is supposed to be tonight?
Well, we have some idea. We're thinking that it could possibly run roughly 35 to 40 minutes, but that is just an educated guess, if you will. We did receive some notes from the White House today detailing some of the aspects of the speech. But, you know, those notes could be, you know, just that, an indication. But we will certainly find out in a few moments if, in fact, the different points that he's hitting on in the notes that we received, how long he'll actually, you know, elaborate on those points. And, of course, that'll have an impact on how long the speech itself will be. But I'm thinking probably around the 40-minute mark.
And then, of course, following the president's speech, the Republicans will have a response. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina will be providing the Republican response, so we'll certainly carry that as well. You know, we got the notes today about what President Biden will be speaking about. Of course, there could be some curveballs in there. David, this question to you: do you think? What do you foresee? What do you think? Any curveballs? Any surprises will be thrown in there tonight? Maybe, you know, maybe an olive branch to Republicans.
No, I don't see any. I don't see any olive branch whatsoever.
All right,
Jenna.
Oh, all right. Thank you, David. And let's go live there now. We can see the president about to enter the House floor.
Rostrum, and as we noted, there he will deliver his speech, the address that he gives to the Speaker and to the Vice President. Just passing Liz Cheney, who's been making a lot of news lately, Jenna.
I think that is, you know, Liz Cheney. She's, you know, one Republican to go against the grain of President Trump? That is one question. How much will President Biden harken back to President Trump? We know that he is going to address the January 6th insurrection on Capitol Hill. But how much will he, speak about President Trump and look backward? I think that's a question, that a lot of people are asking tonight.
Real quickly, let's just kind of let this moment play out as he gets to the rostrum. I think he'll probably turn and make an address to, or salutation of some sort to Speaker Pelosi and Vice President Harris. There it is, delivering the speech. And any moment now, he will begin his first joint address to Congress.
I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
And that was Speaker Nancy Pelosi introducing President Biden in his first address to Congress. About 200 people in the audience tonight, much smaller because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we see Jill Biden there.
Good to be back.
Again, Jenna, the speech expected to be a pivot point, not only to hearken to the accomplishments of the administration, but pivot to his agenda going forward.
Yeah, a window into what may be to come in his administration.
Let's listen in.
Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words, and it's about time. First Lady, I'm her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Turning peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America is ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America, none. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together, we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling, with your help, everyone's help, we're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. You're eligible now. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January, down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all the adults in America have gotten at least one shot. A mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona, I asked the nurse, I said, "What's it like?" She looked at me and she said, "It's like every shot is giving a dose of hope," was her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida who has a child suffering from an autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she's worried, and she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried. Cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on their kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and school bus drivers and cafeteria workers have been vaccinated. Grandparents, hugging their children and grandchildren instead of pressing hands against the window to say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it, you know it better than any group of Americans, there's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You all know it when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. A single mom in Texas who wrote me, she said she couldn't work, but she said the relief check put food on the table and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective in this crisis, has been cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, nice cars, lined up for miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger is down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this, but the American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses that reopen and keep their employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act when I established a special sign-up period to do that. 800,000 in that period. We're making one of the largest one-time ever investments, ever, in improving health care for veterans. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. And maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this was all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, if you think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America, our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united 2 oceans and brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I proposed the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. Creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure. Jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways. Jobs building ports and airports, rail corridors, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines, so every American can drink clean water. And in the process, it will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. It creates jobs connecting every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. This is going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, if she would, because I know it will get done. Creates jobs building a modern power grid. Our grids are vulnerable to storms, hacks, catastrophic failures with tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during the winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs that lay thousands of miles of transmission lines needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look, the American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs and back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Medicare waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican, Democrat or Republican voters. Their great concern, almost as much as their children, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits, continuing a cycle of growth. For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. The American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy-efficient buildings and homes. Electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and get paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So, folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have the capacity. We're the brightest, best trained people in the world. The American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s. Buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. And I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now, I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in the years to come. It is an 8-year program. These are good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, no one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well, equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, the American Jobs Plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change, and some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work in national security issues know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs that enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create a similar advanced research projects agency for health. And here's what it would do. It would have a singular purpose: to develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed the cancer proposal in the last year as vice president. Almost $9 million going to NIH. And if excuse the point of personal privilege, I'll never forget you standing, Mitch, and saying, name it after my deceased son. It meant a lot. But so many of us have deceased sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure like the ones we're talking about have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before the Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you, I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies because it takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and, in turn, America. First is access to good education. When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 20th century. But the world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we'd think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in the position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. The research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college or something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. But their students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on that provide those jobs of the future. Jill is a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Jill. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee what I'm proposing in legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high-quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. We're one of the few industrial countries in the world. No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck, or taking care of themselves and their loved ones, or parent or spouse or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it. So we did that in the last piece of legislation we passed. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans who buy their coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so their premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly it's needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families on the Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. We know how to do this. The last president had that as an objective. We all know how outrageously expensive drugs are in America. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices of anywhere in the world, right here in America. Nearly 3 times for the same drug, nearly 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. Let's do what we talked about for all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. And by the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. Lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough. Democrats and Republicans, let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. A recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take the top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody. But I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say, they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them, whose taxes you want to raise? Instead, whose are going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. It used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them is they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as what we're experiencing now, pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America is an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 from the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone. It's a global. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to only matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world. China, Russia, India, European Union. And I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. My attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity to raise the standard of living of almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I proposed tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I've said, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to our alliances. Without him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionately to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the fear. We're never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. And make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want... I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act, We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down through generations because you have access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over the past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. And I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact on this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer are wearing Kevlar vests? I mean, they'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform, and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. There's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration. And it helped keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job done. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers. The young people who've only known America as their home. and permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster, as well as a pathway to citizenship for farm workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. But let's act. And if we truly want to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history, in the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we, the people, are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we, the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. That if we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. As I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation, and I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because of what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. on our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just, as one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There's not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
And there you have President Biden concluding his speech, ending on the theme of unity, which was a major theme of his campaign, delivering his first address to a joint session of Congress. I'm John Jessup, joined here by Jenna Browder, as well as CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody and CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson. David, to you first. And just mind you, we've got to keep this short because in about 5 minutes we're going to have the Republican response. Your initial thoughts?
Well, I'll keep it short. He said America is on the move. The problem is, where is that directional arrow pointing? He thinks it's pointing up. Half the country thinks it's pointing down. You know, I got to tell you, it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. A bunch of flowery words, a bunch of liberal stuff that we've heard time and time again from many liberal presidents. And the bottom line is there was no credit at all to Donald Trump about Operation Warp Speed. In other words, that was what got this thing rolling in the first place with the vaccines. If you're going to speak about unity, if you want to bring the country together, you got to throw the other side a bone. You got to throw the other side a bone. Never did. Absolutely never did. Didn't do it in the entire speech. As a matter of fact, tore down Trump a couple times during the end of the speech. And so, look, it sounds great on paper, but you know what? Yada, 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 as they say in Seinfeld. I was thoroughly unimpressed. I've got a whole long list of things we can go to, but I'm sure you want to get to some other folks.
We do want to talk about some of those things, David, but to Abby first. In just a few hours, Abby, or excuse me, in a few minutes, we will hear from the GOP response to the president's speech, which will be delivered by South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. What kind of reactions are you seeing from lawmakers so far?
Well, this year's been unique. Normally, I'm right outside the House chamber talking to lawmakers as I come out. But this year, I was on Twitter just following. And, you know, what I saw is Democrats very highly praising President Biden's speech, very on board with the agenda he laid out. But as David said, Republicans, a lot of them were very critical that President Biden seemed to take credit for the success of vaccines in America and did not give any acknowledgement to President Trump and the Trump administration for Operation Warp Speed. It was interesting in this sort of unique, intimate setting we had. You could really notice the lawmakers' reactions when the cameras were panning around the room there. And I thought it was interesting when they showed Senator Mitt Romney and Senator Marsha Blackburn when President Biden was talking about the $15 minimum wage increase, and they were just not having it. But there were some moments, though, where we saw it looked like most of the chamber was standing, and I saw people tweeting from inside, you know, acknowledging moments where both sides seemed to be standing up. That was when President Biden talked about ending cancer, a hard one to disagree with. You know, he mentioned, excuse me, I'm trying to read my notes here in the dark, America being on the move. And getting past the pandemic, that got a big applause. And some of his comments on jobs, you know, and not all of them. I saw some Republicans talking about how President Biden was talking about creating jobs when he started right out the gate, ending thousands of jobs by killing the Keystone Pipeline. But there were parts of his early on, he talked a lot about jobs, and there were parts of that you did see Republicans stand and applaud and support. So, you know, I think for the most part, it was not surprising reaction. Democrats were on board. Republicans were notably critical, but not many surprises there.
It was a sweeping speech. You know, he talked about everything from the American Rescue Plan to pivoting to the American Jobs Plan. He wanted to talk about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. He talked about climate, health care, to the Justice and Policing Act, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. David, we know that the official Republican response will come in just any minute now from Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. He was elected to the U.S. House back in the Tea Party wave in the 2010 election. He won re-election back in 2012 and was appointed to fill Senator Jim DeMint's seat in the Senate. David, talk to us about why Senator Scott was chosen tonight.
Well, he's going to talk a lot about unity. He's been an up-and-coming, rising star in the Republican political party for a very long time. He's there now. He's really at the top, and this is a good showcase for him. Look, before we get to that, I just wanted to make a couple other points, too, about Joe Biden's speech. There was a crisis at the border. It's not a situation. There's a crisis at the border. He never said the word crisis. Not that I expected him to say the word crisis, but he didn't even talk really about the issue at the border. He talked about legislation, immigration legislation. And then he said this, and if I can put my glasses on here, he said the root of the problem is basically, and I'm trying to find it here now at the last second, but he talked about the root of the problem is, he said we're going to have to get to the root of the problem. He talked about Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, the violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability. He didn't say his rhetoric. Not that I think he was ever going to say his rhetoric, but his rhetoric to say, come on over to America, that's the root of the problem. I mean, come on, folks. I mean, let's just get with the program. Can we at least be honest about what's going on here? And also, he said that January 6th was the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Did I miss 9/11? Did I miss 2,977 people dying on 9/11? I mean, I looked back in the headlines back then. That was considered, I believe it's considered, but even folks back then considered that an attack on our democracy. It was an attack on our institutions. It was an attack on this country. So I'm not quite sure what he's talking about. January 6th, we all agree is horrible. One of the worst attacks in America. No one said, don't hear anything other than that. But let's be clear, January 6th was the worst attack since the Civil War on democracy. Maybe we should talk to the victims of 9/11 about that for a story in Faith Nation this week.
Yeah. Strong language for sure there, David, the Civil War comment. Throughout the speech, though, we really did seem to strike a tone of unity for a lot of Republicans sitting in the chamber that, probably fell pretty flat. When he says America is on the move again, what do you think he means by that exactly? You mentioned, people having kind of different interpretations of that, whether moving up, moving down. What's kind of your read on that?
Well, I think more people are getting vaccinated. We're coming out of COVID. In the Democrats' view, more money is being spent, which is a good thing. And if you notice what he said at the end, and this was an interesting line, he talked about we the people. He said, we the people are the government. Don't think you would hear Ronald Reagan say that. So we the people are government. I think that's going to be a controversial line tomorrow morning. And so this idea of America's on the move, getting back to what you were saying, the vaccines, COVID, but also very important that Democrats believe that if you throw money at a problem, that means you're on the move to better solutions. Well, ask LBJ in the war on poverty how throwing money at a solution works. We've been throwing money at the solution of poverty, so to speak, to try to cure poverty since 1965-ish, circa 1965, and it's gotten us nowhere. So this idea that you're going to throw money at stuff doesn't mean America's on the move, but that's what he meant by it, Jenna.
Abby, I want to turn to you, but just real quickly, once again, let our audience know that any moment now we'll be turning to the Republican response from Tim Scott. The president made mention of all the different proposals in his agenda that he wants to move forward, everything from the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which of course comes at a critical moment for our country as far as racial inequity. He talked about VAWA. He talked about the Equality Act. The question is, with the slim majority that he has in Congress, both in the House and the Senate, how is he going to be able to pull any of these things across the line without actually appealing to the other side, to Republicans and bipartisanship?
Well, as Senate rules stand right now, it doesn't look likely that he's going to be able to do most any of that. With the Senate filibuster in place, they would need 60 votes in the Senate, and that would require getting 10 Republicans on board to break a filibuster and move on to some of the legislation President Biden's proposing. And right now, it doesn't sound like they have the votes in the Democratic Party to permanently do away with the filibuster and make it so that most bills would only need a simple majority to pass the Senate. So most of President Biden's agenda right now is in jeopardy if he does not start working across the aisle and trying to get bipartisan support for these very big ideas and big plans that he's laid out.
Tonight's speech, of course, was, trying to, I think, bring in lawmakers to his agenda and his ideas, but also the American people. David, on the lawmaker front, do you think he did make some inroads with these lawmakers? Did he throw them any kind of branch that they could grab onto?
Not really. However, let me give a couple of positive credits here to Joe Biden. Number one, he did talk about Buy American. He talked about his American Families Plan being, in essence, kind of a blue-collar job type plan. I thought that was very effective. But by the way, that's what Donald Trump was saying, too. So what is he, Donald Trump 2.0? I don't think anybody thinks he's Donald Trump 2.0, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, Donald Trump kept talking about buying American, but notice Donald Trump would say Buy American, Hire American. Tonight, we only heard Buy American. We didn't hear Hire American. But anyhow, that's besides the point. But I thought it was effective by Biden. Also, and Abby, I don't know if you picked up on, I'm sure you did, but what I picked up on the immigration front is that legislatively, he was saying, look, he wants the pathway to citizenship, and he wants certain things in the immigration deal. But then he said, if you can't get there, basically, he said, at least give me Daca. And I thought that was interesting because I think that's exactly where this is going. I think that's probably the, quote, middle ground. They're not going to get anything solved on the border as kind of a sweeping bill. It's just not there. But on Daca, I think that was what's going to happen going forward.
Yeah, David, to your point there, what he was saying, like, well, if we can't agree on the whole kit and caboodle, how about just part? I think Republicans would probably say the same thing about something like the American Jobs Plan. Hey, infrastructure, hey, well, let's pass something maybe smaller that we can all agree on and leave out all of the extra pork that's in there. Abby, I'll let you take that one.
Well, I want to comment on what David said about Daca because, that's something I've followed for a couple of years now. And it's interesting because we've seen that have strong bipartisan support. And just a few years ago, Republicans, when they couldn't get a bipartisan immigration plan across the finish line, they were even floating the idea with some Democrats of passing just a bill that protects the dreamers, but then it got in the weeds with they couldn't get the support. The bipartisan groups working on it could not get the support to pass just a plain dreamers bill. And I think that's what we're going to see yet again, because we have senators like Lindsey Graham who have introduced and co-sponsored the DREAM Act for almost a decade now alongside Senator Dick Durbin, who's now saying that he might not vote for it in this Senate session if there is not border security because of what's happening at our southern border right now. So, we're seeing bills and ideas that even have bipartisan support that still might not make it across the finish line just because of where we are politically.
David, I thought it was interesting. I read in McClatchy today that President Biden has only spoken with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell twice. Those two go back decades together in the Senate. There was a moment tonight when he alluded to Senator McConnell in the chamber saying the cancer research that he was working on when he was vice president, he alluded to the kind gesture of naming it after his deceased son, Beau Biden. David, I want to ask and pivot here just a little bit. We're going to hear from Senator Tim Scott in just a moment giving the Republican response. He, of course, is working with Democrats on their police reform effort. You just heard President Biden saying, let's pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act by George Floyd's death, the one-year anniversary coming up in May 25th. Is there any way that that's going to happen? Have you been kind of hearing anything, the percolation, if you will, with the discussions and the conversations going on with Senator Scott?
No, that's a good question, John. I think there's a chance. Abby might have more information, more intel on the Hill. My sense of it is that there's a chance here. on some sort of bipartisan police reform bill. A lot of it has to do with this immunity issue that we've heard so much about. Basically, Democrats want individuals that are in essence attacked by the police to be able to sue a specific police officer. Republicans say, no, we don't want that. Tim Scott's bill would actually allow you to, in essence, sue the police headquarters, the police.
Abby, we'll go ahead and toss it back over to you, as David suggested. What are you hearing? Why this time around? Last year, when Tim Scott was leading the effort in the Senate on police reform, it didn't go anywhere. Why is there momentum now this year? And do Democrats and Republicans see each other as good faith partners? Actually, we're going to pause because I'm being told we have Tim Scott. We'll go to him live.
To govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground, about this feeling that our nation is sliding off its shared foundation and how we move forward together. Growing up, I never dreamed I would be standing here tonight. When I was a kid, my parents divorced. My mother, my brother, and I moved in with my grandparents. 3 of us sharing 1 bedroom. I was disillusioned and angry, and I nearly failed out of school. But I was blessed. First, with a praying mama. And let me say this, to the single mothers out there who are working their tails off, working hard, trying to make the ends meet, wondering if it's worth it, you can bet it is. God bless your amazing effort on the part of your kids. I was also blessed by a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, and finally with a string of opportunities that are only possible here in America. This past year, I've watched COVID attack every rung of the ladder that helped me up. So many families have lost parents and grandparents too early. So many small businesses have gone under. Becoming a Christian transformed my life, but for months, too many churches were shut down. Most of all, I'm saddened that millions of kids have lost a year of learning when they could not afford to lose a single day. Locking vulnerable kids out of the classroom is locking adults out of their future. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did. Science has shown for months that schools are safe. But too often, powerful grown-ups set science aside, and kids like me were left behind. The clearest case I've seen for school choice in our lifetimes, because we know that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Last year, under Republican leadership, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID packages. Congress supported our schools, our hospitals, saved our economy, and funded Operation Warp Speed, delivering vaccines in record time. All 5 bills got 90 votes in the Senate. Common sense found common ground. In February, Republicans told President Biden we wanted to keep working together to finish this fight. But Democrats wanted to go it alone. They spent almost $2 trillion on a partisan bill that the White House bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Only 1% went to vaccinations, no requirement to reopen schools promptly. COVID brought Congress together 5 times. This administration pushed us apart. Another issue that should unite us is infrastructure. Republicans support everything you think of when you think of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, high-speed broadband. We're in for all of that. But again, Democrats want a partisan wish list. They won't even build bridges to build bridges. Less than 6% of the president's plan goes to roads and bridges. It's a liberal wish list of big government waste, plus the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Experts say when all is said and done, it would lower wages of the average American worker and shrink our economy. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best. Infrastructure spending that shrinks our economy is not common sense. Weakening our southern borders and creating a crisis is not compassionate. The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court. This is not common ground. Nowhere do we need common ground more desperately than in our discussions of race. I have experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal. But my Democratic colleagues blocked it. I extended an olive branch. I offered amendments, but Democrats used a filibuster to block the debate from even happening. My friends across the aisle seemed to want the issue more than they wanted a solution. But I'm still working. I'm hopeful that this will be different. When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress, but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination, and it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who has voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and so do the voters. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no-excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce election day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab. This misplaced outrage is supposed to justify Democrats' new sweeping bill that would take over elections for all 50 states. It would send public funds to political campaigns you disagree with and make the bipartisan Federal Elections Commission partisan. This is not about civil rights or our racial past. It's about rigging elections in the future. And no, the same filibuster that President Obama and President Biden praised when they were senators, the same filibuster that the Democrats used to kill my police reform bill last year, has not suddenly become a racist relic just because the shoe is now on the other foot. Race is not a political weapon to settle every issue the way one side wants. It's far too important. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. This administration inherited a tide that had already turned. The coronavirus is on the run. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding. So why do we feel so divided? Anxious. A nation with so much cause for hope should not feel so heavy-laden. A president who promised to bring us together should not be pushing agendas that tear us apart. The American family deserves better, and we know what better looks like. Just before COVID, we had the most inclusive economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, and a 70-year low nearly for women. Wages were growing faster at the bottom than at the top. The bottom 25% saw their wages go up faster than the top 25%. That happened because Republicans focused on expanding opportunity for all Americans. In addition to that, we passed opportunity zones, criminal justice reform, and permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities for the first time ever. We fought the drug epidemic, rebuilt our military, and cut taxes for working families and single moms like the one that raised me. Our best future will not come from Washington schemes or socialist dreams. It will come from you, the American people, Black, Hispanic, white, and Asian, Republican and Democrat, brave police officers in Black neighborhoods. We are not adversaries. We are family. We are all in this together, and we get to live in the greatest country on earth. The country where my grandfather in his 94 years saw his family go from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. So I am more than hopeful. I am confident that our finest hour is yet to come. Original sin is never the end of the story, not in our souls and not for our nation. The real story is always redemption. I am standing here because my mom has prayed me through some really tough times. I believe our nation has succeeded the same way because generations of Americans in their own ways have asked for grace and God has supplied it. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
And that was Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, referencing scripture from Numbers in the Old Testament, delivering the Republican response to the president's joint session address. We have team coverage. David Brody, Abigail Robertson are with us. Abigail, to you first, what was your biggest takeaway from the GOP response?
Well, I think Senator Scott just laid out what is going to be the framework for many GOP members who are running for re-election in 2022 stump speech as we start getting back on the campaign trail and hear some of them speaking. And I think one of the biggest takeaways that one of the strongest points that Republicans are probably going to bring up a lot over the next 2 years is the fact that under President Trump and the Republican-controlled Senate, they passed 5 bipartisan COVID relief bills, whereas right out the gate, President Biden, who campaigned on unity, we saw pass the first COVID relief bill solely along party lines. I think we're going to hear Republicans bring that up a lot over the next few years.
David, Senator Scott, the only black Republican in the Senate, he really leaned into race. Of course, that is one of the key issues of our day. David, looking at both speeches, both of them very upbeat, what do you think the headline will be coming out of this evening?
Well, I don't even know where to begin. Can I take a step back for a second and say I've never heard a better rebuttal than Tim Scott's rebuttal. I mean, John and Jenna, to Abby's point, I'll take it a step further. If you're a Republican in the Senate or the House running in 2022, here's what you do. You take the entire 7, 8, 10 minutes, whatever it was, of Tim Scott's speech, and you play that at your rally. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. He explained it perfectly in terms of how you're going to have to beat Democrats in 2022. His key line, and there were so many of them, but his key line when he talked about the infrastructure bill and he talked about Democrats on the infrastructure bill, he says, let me quote you exactly. I don't want to mess it up. He said, they being Democrats, they won't even build bridges to build bridges. What else are you going to say? This was really, really good tonight by Tim Scott. I mean, this wasn't Marco Rubio chugging water, and this wasn't some Bobby Jindal back in the day coming down the steps awkwardly. This was the best rebuttal I have ever seen, and it's exactly what Republicans need to do to take back the midterms in 2022. Look, I've interviewed Tim Scott many times, and I remember interviewing him back in the day. What was this, about 7 years ago? If you go to cbnnews.com, you'll probably find the piece that I did a profile on Tim Scott. And he wears his faith on his sleeve. He got witnessed to by a manager at Chick-fil-A. It's a great story. And he clearly was not just leaning into race, but leaning into the racial issues in our country, divisions in our country. But he was really leaning into his faith. And he really talked about unity tonight. I was kind of blown away. I was blown away.
Yeah, he invoked, of course, a lot of that faith in comments that said his mom prayed him through some really difficult times. He closed with that scripture from Deuteronomy, may the Lord bless you and keep you. You know, one thing he also did was he gave credit to President Trump and the Trump administration for COVID-19 and Operation Warp Speed. This is a quote. He said, this administration inherited, this administration, meaning the Biden administration, inherited a tide that was already turned. Abby, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that is something that Republicans, again, are going to bring up over the next 2 years ahead of the 2022 midterms and point to it was their bills that they passed in 2020 that have an Operation Warp Speed and things under the Trump administration that have led to some of the success we're seeing right now fighting the coronavirus pandemic. And yeah, I think David is right. What he just laid out is the things we're going to hear for many Republicans reiterate in the months and weeks to come.
It is interesting when you look at the polling that was just released. The strongest poll numbers that President Biden gets is over his handling of the coronavirus and upscaling the vaccination rollout. That was, if you look at the poll numbers for President Trump when he was exiting office, those were the lowest numbers. So it is interesting to see public perception of that. Jenna, I know that you wanted to bring in some sound that we have from President Biden's speech. What was that sound that we have?
Yes, he was talking about, you know, how to pay for all of these expensive sweeping plans, from infrastructure to this American Families Plan to the COVID relief plan, about $6 trillion in total. And here's what he said about paying for it. That's really the sticking point.
How do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out.
And we saw, you know, Senator Mitt Romney's reaction there. He didn't have much of one when he talked about the economy and trickle-down policies. Abby, what did you make of some of these lawmakers' reaction, particularly the Republicans, to a lot of the president's talking points?
Yeah, well, you could hear in the chamber, Democrats were very on board, very supportive of the plans and how he's going to pay for these plans in the chamber. But as you said, you could see Senator Mitt Romney's reactions and others. And I saw Republican lawmakers on Twitter talking about tax increases and how Democrats, they lay out these ideas, but they're going to cost the middle-class American, and they're going to raise taxes, and they sound great, but how are we going to pay for them? And I think that that's something Republicans are going to keep questioning. And again, a lot of these ideas, if President Biden does not bring Republicans to the table and does not try and work with them to find some kind of compromise, we're not going to see any of this happen. So he is going to have to reach across the aisle and work with senators to get the votes needed to get things to his desk if he wants to see his agenda passed and signed into law.
David, to Abby's point, you know, some of political observers say it looks like Biden is prioritizing passing bills first and then bipartisanship coming second, even though that was a really main theme of his campaign. You know, let's talk about where we go from here with his legislative agenda. If we're not looking at bipartisanship, how it's typically framed, which is working with members of the House and the Senate in the Beltway to try to advance policy, and it's being reframed and recast as this is getting Republican voters support this along with the vast majority of Democrats. How do we move forward as a country, and who wins and who loses out here?
John, it's such a great question, because if you're going to go by polling, well, I can bring you 5 different polls that say 5 different things. And I can also bring you 5 different polls that are phrasing questions different ways. So if we're going to go by that standard, I mean, I can literally make a case for majority support for Republican and Democrat policy positions. So that makes it very, very hard, very, very confusing. I do want to say, I'm sorry, I'm laughing late at night here about trickle-down economics. I've got no life when I'm starting to laugh about trickle-down economics. But did Joe Biden miss the 1980s? Did he miss the Reagan years? Wait, no, he was around during the Reagan years. He's probably been around since the Civil War. The point simply is that there were economic prosperous times during Reagan's years. That was trickle-down economics. Hello, Google it, Gen Zers. Anyhow, don't get me started on that. But beyond trickle-down economics, you asked me at the beginning of all of this, after Tim Scott, John, you asked me what the headline is. Look, I think we're living in such a divided America that Americans are choosing their own headline. If you're a liberal, you're going to MSNBC, CNN, and all those places, and you're seeing headlines that say, America's on the move, way to go, Joe Biden, you're the best thing since sliced bread. And if you're going to some of the conservative sites, you're seeing America is on the move into the abyss. And I think that pretty much sums up the speech on both sides.
Unfortunately, I think you're right, but this is also an opportunity for Christians to kind of come in the middle. You know, Christ said in the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And I think that's a really great opportunity for people who carry the cross of Christ as our focus to kind of try to do our part. We won't see it in politics, but perhaps we can see it when we come together by sharing the light of Christ.
True.
Well, what a night. Abby and David, thank you both for joining us. And that's going to do it for this special coverage of President Joe Biden's first address to the joint session of Congress. A reminder, if you want to continue the conversation, head on over to CBN News and our YouTube page and join the live chat along with other viewers.
Thanks, Jenna. For continuing coverage, go to cbnnews.com and tune in to tomorrow's 700 Club for a full recap of tonight's address. We'll see you right back here tomorrow evening for Faith Nation. Have a great night.
You've been watching special live coverage from the CBN News Channel. We now return you to scheduled programming already in progress.